few years ago now, John and I traveled to Niagara-on-the-Lake, and we participated in one of those wine tours where you go to all the different vineyards and you get to experience the flights of wine. And thankfully, I wasn't the one driving because it doesn't take too many of those flights, even though they're little, to add up and impair your judgment. But we had an opportunity to visit the grapes. We saw the vines growing. We saw all the background things that go on when it comes to making a good bottle of wine. And it's amazing how many factors have to come together to make a decent bottle of wine. These people are so reliant on the weather, on the quality of the grapes, on the entire process to make sure that the process of fermenting and bottling goes well. And when all that happens and everything falls into place, you get a good bottle of wine at the end of the process. No wonder wine is an important aspect of many of the milestones in our lives. We toast the bride and groom at weddings with wine. We toast a successful business transaction over a glass of wine. Birthdays, celebrations, anniversaries, usually wine is involved. Wine was an important part of the Passover celebration that we read about in the Old Testament and that Jesus and his disciples participated in. And in memory of Jesus, wine is used in the sacrament of Holy Communion. Wine also figured prominently in Jesus' first miracle, as described in the Gospel of John. So today we're going to start a new sermon series. It's a 3-week sermon series called The First. And we're going to be taking a look at some of the firsts in Jesus' ministry and what impact they still have on our lives today. So today, the start of this sermon series on the first sermon is on the first miracle. And we're going to read about that first miracle as told by John. John's the only one that tells this story. And it's found in John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. And if you're following along in the Bibles that are provided here, that's found on page 751. And if you've brought your Bible from home, John chapter 2, John is, of course, in the New Testament. It is the fourth gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So we're going to read about the first miracle. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, a little bit saucy there to his mom. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The Gospel of John is very different than the other 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Those Gospels are called the Synoptic Gospels. They give us a historical account of Jesus' life on earth. But the Gospel of John is very different. In John's Gospel, he does more to describe who Jesus was and is than to give an historical account of his life. So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, each one of them tells us about the stories of Jesus from their own personal perspective. But in the Gospel of John, we're shown who Jesus really is. John is trying to identify Jesus as the Son of God, the Messiah that they've been waiting for, the Christ. And he starts his gospel with these amazing words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Could be confusing words. They could be described in very different ways, but he's describing Jesus Christ as the Word, the Logos, the knowledge, the one we have been waiting for. And throughout John's Gospel, he has other analogies, wonderful symbols to describe who Jesus is. He describes Jesus as the bread of life, the living water, the light of the world, the good shepherd, the vine, the resurrection and the life, the way, the truth, and the life. All these wonderful images to describe who Jesus really is. So John's retelling of the miracle at the wedding in Cana falls in line with this purpose of describing who Jesus really is. So this is really less a story about the wine and more a story about identity. This miracle points to Jesus, confirming who he is and why he has come to the world. And I think sometimes we may think we know who Jesus is. We've listened to countless sermons trying to tell us who Jesus is. We've read endless descriptions. We've sung numerous songs describing the attributes, the characteristics of Jesus. But one thing I've discovered is, even though we might think we've got a handle on who Jesus is, as soon as we think we've got him all figured out, the scriptures tend to shed light on him in a new way. And we might see him through new eyes, experience him in a new description. And I pray that each one of us here this morning would have that happen to us today as we talk about this scripture passage. That we would discover more about who Jesus is, and that by knowing his identity, it can help transform our identity. And I'd like to talk this morning about 3 aspects of Jesus' identity that I think we can glean from this story about his first miracle, turning the water into wine at this wedding feast. And the first thing I think we can learn about Jesus through this miracle is that he was present in the events of daily life. Here he was, part of the community, part of a family, showing up to celebrate a family, a communal event, showing up as a guest at the wedding. And I think there's something very significant in the fact that his first miracle took place at a celebration. And it actually took place to add joy, more joy to this celebration. He was part of a party. He was celebrating. He was part of the community. He was there as part of his family. He was participating in the social norms of the day. So we're reminded through this act that sure, Jesus was divine, fully God, but he was fully human as well. And he took part in aspects of everyday human existence. He was part of a family. He was part of a community. He was a son, attending a wedding with his mom, even sassing her a little bit there. He was a son who, though, listened to his mom and listened to her prompting. It was through her insistence that this miracle took place. We don't know what plan A was. Jesus says, that now is not my time, when Mary first speaks to him about this. So we don't know what that time was. We don't know what plan A was. But we do know what plan B was. This is plan B. And who knows if it would have still happened if Mary had not mentioned anything. Maybe that bridegroom and that host would have been scarred by the social faux pas that they committed. But Jesus took that opportunity at a celebration with his family in the community, and he performed his first miracle. I think this is significant for us because when we are facing the challenges that come from being a part of a family, part of a community, we can relate to Jesus because we know he dealt with those same challenges. He was family. He was community. He was in a social structure, fully participating in the aspects of social life. And I know for me, that comes as a comfort, because when we're facing the challenges of family, of community, we can turn to Jesus for help. He knows those challenges because he faced them himself. I think another thing that we can learn from this first miracle at the wedding is that Jesus challenges the status quo. Those 6 stone jars are really important in this story. Up until this time, the faith of the Jewish people was revealed through their adherence to the laws. And we can read all about those laws in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, especially in Exodus and Leviticus. And there are numerous laws. There's the 10 Commandments, but there's hundreds more about what to eat, what to wear, who to be seen with, what to do. Their life and their faith was ruled by the law. And those 6 stone jars are at this wedding as part of this adherence to the law. After the wedding was over, those 6 jars would be filled with water, and those faithful believers, the faithful followers of the Jewish faith, would then ritually clean themselves from the water in that jar, in those jars. So it's really significant that Jesus took the water from those 6 ceremonial jars, and he turned that water into wine. Now, the Jesus movement had just begun. Something was going on. We can read in John chapter 1, just the verses preceding the passage we read today, that Jesus had started to gather up his disciples. And by the time of the wedding feast in Cana, he'd gathered 5 disciples, as described in John chapter 1. So Jesus is there with his mom, but we're also told the disciples are there with him. And something is happening. This movement is starting to gain momentum. They know this guy, there's just something special about him. He's started to gather followers. He's starting to stand out in the community. And then he does this. He takes the water of purification and transforms that water into wine. He transforms the waters of purification into the wine of celebration. Now, I can imagine that probably didn't go over very well with those who were strict adherents to the laws of Israel. How dare he even touch that water?